Hello and welcome to Simply Tax. There's been almost a dizzying amount of change in the tax world in the last few years. To give you a sense, here's a handful of introductions to episodes of the podcast in 2019. Hello and welcome to Simply Tax. Today, we're going to party like it's 1999 Cap with returning podcast guest Tony Nitty with a look at the final regulations that were issued by Treasury and the IRS on January 18th, 2019.
There have been a lot of headlines swirling about the taxation of the digitalized economy. I feel like lately, we've been running a continuous race of change and learning when it comes to accounting methods.
The international provisions of the TICCHA are no doubt complex. Let's learn together today.
But despite as much as I like to think it is, and as I've said before, the tax headlines aren't the only thing that businesses, their owners, and their advisors need to be watching. So, in episodes 85, 86, and 87 of the podcast, we'll cover three topics that might seem like they don't apply to everyone on the surface. But as we get into discussions, I think you'll agree that there are three things that most need to consider in 2020, whether you're in the for-profit or not-for-profit space. We'll start with protecting your data by hearing from BKD's Rex Johnson with an important look at cybersecurity. Then, we'll break down changes to accounting for leases with Chris Telly and Jessica Richter by tackling the new lease standard in episode 86. And we'll round out our three with a discussion on building better boards and being a great board member in episode 87 with Dan Prater. As always, you can learn more about our guests, get their contact information, check out additional resources, and even listen to the full episodes of the podcast for all those clips that we just played at the beginning here with the show notes of this episode, which are available at bkd.com. Let's get started.
Simply Tax.
My name is Rex Johnson. I'm a director in the BKD cyber practice, oversee a number of the cybersecurity assessments that we're doing for some of our existing clients as well as new clients. So it's been a great opportunity as we continue to grow and offer more capabilities with cybersecurity.
Yeah. I feel like it's a complicated term, like cybersecurity, and what is it? So maybe if you could help me out there with what it is and a little background on it.
If you look up cybersecurity, it'll tell you that it's the protection of systems, meaning hardware, software, and data, especially connected systems on the internet, from unauthorized access is what that is. So what it comes down to, in my world, I see cybersecurity as the means towards the end, which is the end is data protection. Data exists for a reason. We have smartphones now. We have the cloud, as we call it. We have a number of things. We want the ability to do things. You know, all of us bank online. We do a lot of things online. We buy things online if you're buying things on Amazon or eBay. But we want to make sure that authorized users have the ability to have access to the information when they need it. You know, we talk about the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of that data to the authorized users. So cybersecurity is the means that we use to protect that data, to allow those who should be accessing that data and using it to have it and making sure it's complete and useful for that purpose.
There's a lot in there because there's so much of access that you mentioned. There's the benefits of having that access,
right?
But then with that comes the risk. So it's almost like a balancing act, almost, it seems like, to a certain extent, right? Of figuring out how you're going to assess this risk and create this security around the data that we have.
Absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of great breaks and strides in technology. Data encryption is a wonderful way to help protect that information. But we also got to remember that with that ease of information, we've made it easier for the malicious users and the cyber criminals to access that data and use it for their purposes, to use it for cybercrime. Cybercrime is still the number one use of breaches on the internet. Breaches that are going on. They're the number one cause of that. There's other things that happen. There's hacktivists that use it for their political or religious causes. You've also got some cyber espionage where people use the internet to, there are some countries that have a little bit different view of intellectual property than we do. And that they have a different value structure. So they see this as a way to help improve some of their products. Then you have people that, just use it for just trying to create some sort of propaganda, information out there because of the way that we can easily pull up information and see that. So the whole idea behind cybersecurity is, again, to protect that data. It's to make it available for the people that should have access to it and make sure that data is complete and accurate and available when they need it.
Which I guess then, if you look at it from a business perspective, it's very important.
Right.
Maybe you could speak to a little bit of kind of what are some of the specific reasons of the importance of, because you want access for your customers clearly, and providing, make that ease to do business, but then obviously the importance of safeguarding that information. Could you speak to that a little bit about how the risks really kind of come home to roost for a business and a business owner?
Well, absolutely. I think you have to look at the fact that you're in business for a reason. We're in business to make money and to provide services. That's why we're here. So people want the ease of being able to do business. So you can't not be connected and be successful. It's very hard to do that. So brick and mortar shops are still there, but they still have some sort of online presence. So it's important for businesses because they want to be able to service their customers, provide them that information, provide them the services and products they want. But when you make a purchase, you want to make sure that you can make that purchase safely. You want to make sure that if you're using your credit card or your bank account information to buy that someone who shouldn't have access to that isn't taking that and using it. So it's very important for businesses to realize that. The other thing around data protection is that a number of employees who work for a company will have a lot of their information that doesn't need to get out. For example, personal health information. That is very key because people need health insurance. They need health care. So a lot of organizations will offer that to their employees, but that means there's some very sensitive data that has to do with their own health information that needs to be safeguarded and protected. So only that those who should have access to that, such as the doctors and the individuals themselves, they can access that when needed. The insurance companies can access that when they need to have that. But a lot of information like that is very valuable to cyber criminals. In fact, your credit card, I'm sure you got excellent credit, probably. Yes?
I do. I'd like to say I like to think I do, but yeah.
How much do you think I could get for your credit card if I sold it on the dark web?
I honestly don't know where to start. I'll go with $100.
$100.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Take a couple zeros off that. I would get $1 for your credit card.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because banks have gotten very good at notifying people that their credit card information has been compromised.
Very true.
In fact, USAA is my bank because I'm a veteran. And I remember buying gas in Kansas City and getting a call 5 minutes later from USA Bank, or they reached out to me and they said, Colonel Johnson, we have 2 transactions we need to verify. I said, okay. We said that you have a $20 gas purchase in Kansas City, Missouri. And I said, yeah, that's correct. And we also see a $500 leather jacket purchase 2 minutes later in Amsterdam. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, that probably wasn't you.
No, it's not me. Probably was a very nice leather jacket, but no, that was not me. So banks have gotten very good about that and being able to notify their customers that the credit card has been compromised. So cyber criminals know when they sell a credit card online, that credit card may get one use before it's shut off. May not even get a use at all. So they sell these in bulk. So you can go to the dark web. When you buy credit cards, you buy them in bulk. Whereas the health information, I've had people come to me and say that there was one young man who was an athlete, a triathlete, and he got a bill. He was in San Antonio, Texas, got a bill for open heart surgery in Phoenix, Arizona, because someone stole his health information, posed as him, got open heart surgery in Phoenix, Arizona, and he ended up with whatever didn't get covered by the copay. And he's sitting there, I've never been to Phoenix, and he's a triathlete. But someone easily posed as him by stealing that information. So things like health information, that's going for $85, $100, even higher, because people are using that for different services. They're using that for prescription drugs. They're using that for other things. So even though our credit cards seem to be the most valuable data that's out there, it really isn't, because we've gotten very good at cybersecurity for credit cards. Now it's happening in other forms. And so that's why it's very important that businesses pay attention not only to their customers' data, but to their employee data as well.
There's been a lot of news headlines around data breaches and those sorts of things, and all the nefarious things that can happen and bad things that can happen. But maybe how have some of the mindsets and the attitudes towards cybersecurity and kind of the risk management changed as a result of that?
Well, I think there's a number of things that have helped change that. I think the number of breaches have hit the headlines and got people to think about it. If you look over in Europe, they have what's called the General Data Protection Regulation, so GDPR. And that impacts people in the EU. And when that hit, a lot of folks said, well, how's that really going to affect us in the US? Well, it did have some effects, maybe in a different way than they thought. Because of that, people realized, wow, you mean I have the right to have my information protected? I have the right to, if my information is not accurate with the business, I have the right to correct that. I have the right to opt out of getting marketing mailers and emails from this company. And I have the right to be forgotten once I've gotten my services from this company. And that's kind of what started with GDPR. That's got US to think about other things. Right now, we're on the cusp of the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. It doesn't just impact the state of California. It impacts California residents, which live in all 50 states and the territories. So because of that, businesses realize that a lot of the rules that GDPR was starting to push out, they're going to have to start doing. There are 3 other states that have privacy laws. There are other states that are looking at putting things into place in order for that. So because of that being on the forefront and people being more concerned about their own data privacy and protection of that data, businesses are going to have to pay attention more. And I have seen a shift that organizations and boards have said, you know, this isn't just an IT issue anymore. This is actually a management issue.
Yeah.
And organizations that have started doing that, starting that tone at the top, are getting more serious about protecting that data. And it's starting to trickle down. So I see a lot more of those happenings because of regulations, because of what you see happening, because of consumer demand. All these things are making businesses starting to get really serious about how they treat their data and their customers' data.
Well, it's definitely when you have those, it's almost like an emotion-based reaction too, because there's the fear that comes from it clearly.
Right.
But where do you start as an organization? You mentioned a board, a not-for-profit, a business owner. Where do you start if we're starting from scratch and haven't really done anything that's been coordinated in the past in terms of getting a strategy together around cybersecurity?
Well, I do like to start at the board because the tone at the top will get things to happen.
Okay.
In the past, in my profession, I would go to the IT director who would love what I'm doing, but couldn't quite always get the funding because there's competing things for dollars. I mean, there is not an unlimited amount of money out there. And usually it's the event that hits that causes organizations to say, oh, maybe I need to take this cybersecurity thing more seriously. If you take a look at the companies that have had breaches, all of a sudden, you go from, well, we're getting along just fine to checks being written due to a number of things. So I think you need to start at the top. And a lot of times I like to work with boards and talk to them and say, here's the things to look at. The other thing is not to get in a position where you get in such a panic that you try to patch everything. There needs to be an approach. So a lot of times with companies, I will talk to them about, let's do a baseline assessment. Let's do a basic network penetration test where we actually take a look at your internal network, your external network, your wireless, look at physical security, look at your current governance, your policies and procedures. I can call that a health check. Just kind of see where you are and give them what's called a cybersecurity maturity rating. Kind of see where they are on that scale. Then, based on that, I can come back and say, here's a number of things you need to do, but rather than try to tackle the world at once, let's talk about your strategic objectives. What are things that are important to you versus what's, the highest risk that you have? Work with them and develop what I call a roadmap. An enterprise security roadmap can be like a 3-year plan that takes its time to put the right projects in place to address cybersecurity and have the assessments done at the appropriate time so that they're taking a smarter approach. They're using their dollars more wisely and having a way to really effectively mitigate the risk rather than feel like they've got to tackle the world at once.
It doesn't seem like that would be the thing you'd want to do right away because you kind of want to go for that. Like we have to patch the holes in the boat, we're sinking. I guess what would you say to that? Somebody that raises that sort of a concern, saying, "Yeah, we're really taking on water here." To use that boat metaphor, what do we do?
A lot of times organizations, especially if they've hit the news, will want to show that they're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that one of the things I talk to companies about in their incident response plan is I'll take a look at it, or I'll help them put one together, or I'll help them rehearse it. And I'll ask them the question, who do you have in public affairs or public relations? Who do you have talking to the media? Do they have what they need to have to explain? I've been a public affairs officer for the military. And when something bad happened, one of the guidances I would give the generals is that bad news comes from you first.
Mm-hmm.
If you come out and say, we've been breached, we have this problem, and this is what happened, this is the impact, this is what we're doing about it. When you come out and do that, you give the consumers the confidence that you're taking this seriously. You don't sound like you're trying to hide anything. You actually come out and say, yeah, it's this bad. However, we want to take care of our customers. So we're going to offer them credit protection, or have them some sort of credit monitoring service, or they're going to offer something. There's things you can do to help the consumers feel at ease that you're taking action. I think also people are aware that breaches are happening all the time.
Right.
The average time, honestly, the average time as you take a look at things and really look at the data, you will see that I think the latest number I saw was 197 days that a hacker is in an environment before they're discovered. That's over half a year.
Wow, that's a lot of time to do a lot of damage potentially.
A lot of damage can happen at that time,
Yeah.
and a lot of information can be taken out before they're recognized. And I think what's really important is that people are realizing that, and when companies take responsibility, they admit something happened. They talk about what the damages are and what they're doing about it. That's the right step. Then they put together a plan. I think like anything else, you've got to follow a plan. So the response I have is that every company needs to have an incident response plan for when this happens. And they need to take a look at the various scenarios. Is this scenario a ransomware scenario? Is this a data breach scenario? Is this another type of denial of service? Is this a natural disaster? Are these the thing? What are the things that are stopping me or that have impacted me? And what am I doing in my organization to take care of my customers, take care of my employees, and continue to run business operations? Because that's where we want to get to. And an incident response plan can really help with that.
And that's something, again, that you have to have dialed in on the front end,
right,
to know what that's going to be. So what are some of those? You mentioned kind of getting that roadmap, right, and getting that together. What are some of the things that commonly show up on the roadmap, or things that organizations really need to focus in on, again, over a period of time?
Well, there's a number of things that will come in. Assessments pop up quite a bit. And I know a number of organizations out there are getting SOC reports, especially if they're a service provider. Payment card industry, PCI, is a very big rule that's pushed by the payment brands. The credit card brands are the ones who are driving those. And there's certain things you have to do in order to be able to accept credit card payments. Those things are kind of driving things. You have GLBA for banks and for higher ed. You've got a number of other things out there. So what I see pop up a lot are periodic assessments. These are having someone come in from the outside to take a check and make sure things are there. Build some confidence there, because you're having an independent party do it versus, maybe I think internally you need to do it too. I think that's important to have that capability, but having that done. A lot of things that come up on those will help drive things that may need to be done, like a patching program. There are all sorts of vulnerabilities found in software and hardware all the time. So having a patch management system is something that needs to be in place. I talked about the incident response plan. I think that's very key. And that needs to be tested every year because new threats come up. Policies and procedures are something that come up. And not just writing them once, but every year, someone from management needs to take a look at those and make sure that they're still current. I've helped organizations, and I've looked at security policy that was written in 2005. It's like, okay, things have changed. A few things have changed since then, especially if you really think about that length of time. those kind of things. And the roadmap kind of puts that together. Now, there might be larger projects that need to be done. Maybe there needs to be an implementation of a better logging and monitoring system. Maybe there needs to be a better implementation of some sort of enterprise architecture in there that needs to be secure. But those things are a big part of that. But primarily, it comes down to the continuing checking, the continuing assessments, the continuing making sure that you're staying ahead or current with the current cyber risks that are out there.
Well, and you mentioned the tone at the top being so important.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's probably this again, balancing act that I mentioned between getting to all those things and then maybe sometimes the realities of the resources that are currently available. I guess, how have you seen that work well in organizations in kind of managing those two things?
Well, I think it's important from the standpoint that the tone at the top is vital. There are a lot of times in the past I've seen primarily the IT folks or someone who's a privacy leader try to push for something, and they kind of get pushed to the side because there's other investment options that the company is considering. When it becomes part of the tone at the top, it becomes part of the culture, and there's an expectation. And then basically management is setting goals that are driven by security. By doing that, by having that, they're leading by example. And they're having a great opportunity to show that. But at the same time, they have to recognize that there is no unlimited amount of funds. So by working with the experts in their company to say, what do we really need to do? What are our biggest issues? Which items can we tackle first? And then which ones can wait and what dependencies we have? That is very good synergy. That way the company's spending their money wisely. They're making the right investments. Any risks that they're taking are calculated risks, and they're thought out, and they're mitigating the actual threats, the bigger threats to their organization.
Well, and it seems like the assessment is kind of the cornerstone of that to help in that prioritization of kind of knowing really what the risks are, not just maybe going from instinct or, again, kind of the most recent headline. It's truly specific to your organization, your business, what needs to be done.
And one of the things that we've started doing, we launched a new service called BKD Red Team. And what I really like about this is it's not just another penetration test. Now, I know some companies do a penetration test because their audit committees say, we want one every year. If you do PCI, you have to have a penetration test done. That's part of that. Other guidelines and regulations will require that. And I think that's a very good way to kind of see the health of your network. What I like about a red team is when we actually hack into your environment. And that can be done in a couple ways. One of the ways we like to come in is when the security department doesn't know we're there, and only a few of the executives know. And we come in and we see, how long does it take? I told you 197 days. Well, let's see how long we're in there before the security team recognizes that we're there. And that's a good thing to test a security team. And we don't do it to shame them. We'll come back to them and say, hey, here's some things that you could learn from this and can tip you off had we been an actual hacker.
Yeah.
The other thing that's valuable about a red team assessment is that we don't just tell you what vulnerabilities you have in your network. So if I sit down with a lot of non-technical executives and I tell them they have problems with encryption, with patch management, or they've got cross-site scripting errors on their websites, they look at me like, what are you talking about?
Right. Yeah, you're speaking another language to me now.
Yeah. But when I say, you know what? I walked away with your customer data. Hey, I walked away with all the health information of your employees. Hey, you know that project you have that you think is proprietary that you're getting a patent on? Here it is.
Got it.
I actually showed them the so what of a pen test. I showed them the data. I was able to walk out of their organization. Because when a hacker comes in, they break into your environment, they map out your environment, they go around, they find areas of interest. Once they find the stuff they care about, they start aggregating that information into small files that they can siphon out little by little, and then they exfiltrate it out of your organization. So what we actually do is we do all that, and we show these executives the data we exfiltrated. And I ask the question, had I been a real hacker and had this information, what would that do to your company? That's when companies start to think about, wow, that's the real risk. That tells them the so what behind that. And then we come back and I say, we educate the security team on what they can do to better find this stuff. We talk to them about how they can better protect this information. Because even though a hacker breaks into a network, it doesn't mean they have access to everything in the organization. There's ways you can segment, you can further protect that information. Think of it as if a burglar breaks into your house. Well, maybe they break into your house, but then they come up to a safe. They can't get in the safe. They can't get the stuff out of there.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's ways that you can stop a hacker or mitigate what they do once they're inside your environment. And that's what BKD Red Team does. So I'm very excited about that service. And I think it really helps organizations really see what they need to do to better protect that information. Because then again, it comes down to cybersecurity is a means for data protection.
Yeah, it's one thing, again, like you said, to use the terms and this is what happened, but then to actually, this is the information that was exfiltrated out and taken. I mean, that really, it comes home to roost. So again, there's so much, it's such a broad topic, and it's one that really interests me and excites me, because I guess I'm one that really doesn't know, or I feel like I only know a little bit, like I can scratch the surface with it. So I just feel like looking forward to this conversation so I could get some information from you on it. So are there other things that organizations need to be thinking about, other areas within cybersecurity and risk management that we haven't talked about that you would add?
Well, the thing I would say, it's always going to come down to taking a look at what you want to protect. We could look at a broad area of cybersecurity. You can look at everything from incident response to network assessments to red teams. You could take a look at, it all comes down to, how do I protect my data? The one thing that I would like to come to is that what companies really should be doing is realizing that not all of their data is equal. Some data is more important than others. And when it comes down to cybersecurity, rather than take that shotgun approach that you talked about, think strategically. How do I protect my most valuable information? It comes down to a risk map, or what is the most sensitive data that I need to protect versus the data that if it got out, I'd still run operations. I wouldn't close down. So when I think about talking to companies, I talk to them about prioritization. And I talk to them about thinking about coming down and protecting the most critical elements and then working their way out. And then that's going to help drive all the things they need to do. It's going to drive that roadmap. It's going to drive that strategy. It's where tone at the top is really going to need to be there. And I think that's going to lead to what we call security awareness. I think every company now, almost every company, has some sort of annual security awareness training, which is good. Because security is everybody's responsibility.
Sure.
It's everybody's, and everybody has the opportunity to provide that level of security, whether it's locking their laptop when they leave. If they get up to take a break, lock that screen so nobody can shoulder surf. Think about what do they post on social media. One of the biggest challenges I see is there'll be people posting their vacations in real time on Facebook. Well, guess what? Cyber criminals are looking at that, and they know you're halfway around the world, and they're going to take advantage of that. One of the most common schemes of last year was an urgent payment that needed to be sent to a different wire number or a different account, because guess what? The executive was on the other side of the world, and so the email was spoofed. We hear that happen all the time. Large amounts of money have happened. So just that awareness and realizing that it's everybody's responsibility. So there's a lot out there, but it comes down to, as people are starting to think about it and thinking about protecting their information and protecting the company's information and taking that responsibility on their own, that's going to provide more. And companies can continue to think about that, have those assessments done annually or periodically. That's what's going to help them show that they're serious about it, and also be able to stay compliant and protect themselves better if a breach were to happen.
Well, and I feel like the assessments do the part of helping to assess, as you use the word assessing and assessment, right? The people side of things, because you can have all the great systems in the world, but if you don't have people using them properly or having that responsibility, the awareness, then that's a weakness, obviously. So it seems like even if you've done one before, I would imagine that even, it's kind of a continual iterative process to continue to educate on that responsibility.
Absolutely. And we're getting better at tools for this, where people used to download things on a thumb drive and they'd leave that thumb drive at Starbucks. Well, we've got technology out there now that requires that once you put that thumb drive in, it says, hey, guess what? You got to encrypt me.
Right.
So when you leave a thumb drive at Starbucks or at some other place and somebody picks it up and it's encrypted, it's a lot harder to read.
Right.
As opposed to just picking it up and realizing, hey, I've got all this data.
Right.
Even in the healthcare organization, if you have data, health information that's you have a confirmed breach, you have to report that.
Right.
However, if that's on a drive or device that's encrypted with reasonable encryption and strong encryption, that's not considered a breach because it's a piece of data that's going to be very hard to get to that information. Not impossible, but it's harder.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to the layers of security. You can allow users to continue to do the things they like to be doing by putting controls in place that keep them from being from doing things that are a higher risk.
That about does it for our first topic and our 3 things you need to consider for 2020 series. But the conversation on the topic doesn't have to stop there. Check out the show notes that I mentioned at the start of this episode, available at bkd.com/simplytax, to learn more about the topic, and drop us an email at simplytax@bkd.com and reach out to Rex with questions. It would be simply great if you'd also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to let us know what you think, as they go a long way in helping others find the podcast. It would be great to also connect with you on social media. You can find me out on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram, where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.